You've heard of the brave and ingenious rescue of Jews from the Nazis by Oskar Schindler, and the courageous and unlikely rescue of the American hostages from Iran depicted in the movie Argo. But nobody's heard of the daring and dangerous rescue of the Vietnamese from Saigon by John Reardon. It's a story that's never been told before. It happened nearly 40 years ago at the very end of the Vietnam War, when everyone was trying to escape the communist incursion. No one was paying attention to an unassuming American banker who had already been evacuated going back in to save his stranded Vietnamese colleagues and their families.
You got everybody. Yeah. Everybody worked at the bank, spouses and children.
Right.
There were 105 in all who John Reardon, risking his own life, rescued in the last days of the war.
How are you?
Even now, 4 decades later, when they see him, they know he's the reason they're alive. Today, they're leading prosperous lives as American citizens, with children who are doctors and lawyers, and with grandchildren.
Isabel, do you know my name? John Reardon. You know my last name. That's more than I know.
John Reardon was as far from Rambo and Mission Impossible as you could get. Back in 1975, he was a young banker, handsome and unattached, working as the assistant manager of Citibank in Saigon.
They gave you a villa.
They gave me a villa.
And you lived well.
I lived well, yes.
He hosted barbecues at the villa for the bank's 34 Vietnamese employees. Tellers, secretaries, accountants. They were like a family, tying their future to American banking. But that April, communist tanks were barreling toward Saigon. Hundreds of thousands were leaving or trying to. 3 weeks before Saigon fell, John got an order from Citibank in New York: burn everything important and get out.
They said, John, we've chartered a 747 Pan Am that's coming in, and we want you to take all of your staff and leave the bank and get out to this plane.
By this point, it dawns on you what would happen to those people if you didn't get them out?
Yeah, some of them would be killed.
It's scary. It was very scary.
Cook Pham Vo worked in personnel. Chi Vu was the head teller. They were hearing rumors of reprisals by the Viet Cong against anyone working for the Americans.
Would you have been seen as traitors, as spies?
The closer you to American, the more they think you spy.
But their own government set up checkpoints to keep people from leaving the country. Without exit papers, the staff had no way to escape. John didn't want to leave without them, but the bank ordered him out. So he boarded that Pan Am flight to Hong Kong alone, and the employees were left to fend for themselves.
Did you feel abandoned?
Yes.
Did John say anything to you when he left?
I was crying so much. I was worried about my kids, my husband, and he said, "Don't worry, I'll be there for you."
John and his bosses at Citibank spent day and night in Hong Kong cooking up rescue plans. They tried to send in helicopters, even an oil tanker, and they asked the U.S. government to help, all in vain.
I felt we had all those people back in there, and they were counting on us. And many, many times in the conversations we had with them, they said to us, "Don't let us down. Please do everything you can."
Come on, gents, let's move it.
But after 2 weeks of trying, Citibank said enough. A manager told the Hong Kong team, "If you try some daring rescue mission, you're fired." That night, John's immediate boss, Mike McTighe, a former Marine, asked John to dinner.
And just as my steak arrived, and I was picking up my knife and fork, and he's making small talk, and then suddenly he says, "You know, John, one of us has to go back." And I put down my knife and fork and pushed that steak back, and I could feel tears coming out of my eyes. And he said, "Would you go back?"
Go back, even though it meant losing his job, possibly losing his life. And yet, 11 days before Saigon would fall, the mild-mannered banker defied his bank and better judgment, caught the very last commercial flight into Saigon, and walked into the branch.
And everybody comes running around me and said, what do we do? What do we do? How are we going to get out of here and everything?
But you're there under the authority of who? You're not working for Citibank anymore.
No one. I'm on my own.
On his own authority, Jon moved them with their families, all 105 of them, into his villa and another one nearby, so they'd all be ready to go as a group when and if he came up with a plan. He told them to tell no one where they were. 4 days went by. Nothing was working until a CIA agent told him the only way out now is on U.S. military cargo planes that are evacuating Americans and their dependents.
He says, the evacuation has begun. Take your family and go out to the airport and process them through. And I said, well, I don't have a family. And he said, just create a wife and children, no matter who they are, and go out there and sign the documents.
And this is the first time you've heard this idea.
Yes, yes.
Try and pass off his Vietnamese colleagues, their spouses, and children as his family? There were 105 of them.
Do you say to him, are you kidding me? You don't say cockamamie? You don't say...
No. Because there'd been so much cockamania before that. This is the time to jump on anything that looked like it was going to float.
You were at the end of your rope.
Yes, absolutely.
It was worth a try, but not for all of them at once. He took the bank van and went out to the airfield alone to see if it would work.
I walked into that processing area and somebody gave me a piece of paper. He said, list your dependents on here. And I was fumbling for what piece of paper I was going to have to write this all down. They said, just attach that to this piece of paper and keep going. So
there
it was
were
a bit of a rush.
15 names. You had a wife and 14 names.
Right, that was kind of ambitious
Daughter,
for the start.
son, daughter,
right.
son, yeah.
This is the paper. Wife, daughter, son, 14 kids, some older than he was. He was certifying on a U.S. government document that these were his children.
Is your heart pounding? Or you
yes, a little
palm
bit.
sweating?
I certainly was nervous, yes.
He was stunned when the officer, no questions asked, stamped it and handed Jon evacuation tags. He rushed to the villa to pick the 15 up, amazed that such a crazy idea was actually working.
Do you remember when he came back? What happened?
We're so happy. It's an elation to see he's a lifesaver. He's an angel.
But you had to keep it secret, right?
Yes.
You never told your parents?
No,
So you never said goodbye?
no.
Over the next 4 days, as fear gripped the city, Jon repeated this ruse, going back and forth to the airport 10 times, filling out papers with groups of 6 or 8.
Did any of these officers ever question you in all this time?
This one man, he said, haven't I seen you here before? I said, no, sir, no, absolutely not. Bang, I know he wanted to get going too. And then another time, this man said, well, you've got one heck of a big family here, huh? You've been busy when you've been... I said, oh, yes, I've been here a long time. And just chopped it again.
You just
it was
went back and back and back.
hard to believe it would be that simple to do.
We recently met with 7 of his daughters. They didn't think it was all that simple, since Jon was separating them from their husbands.
All the staff women will go first, and the husband will leave in a separate group. At that moment, I was like thinking, will I ever see my husband again?
Getting the husbands out was the most dangerous.
Yes, because they were either in the army or working for the government. And if the MP, they saw anybody like that or they caught anybody like that, they would shoot right away.
Jon was able to get the husbands' fake adoption papers as his sons and managed to get some of them on what he thought was safe, a U.S. Embassy evacuation bus like this one to the airport. But the bus was stopped by police looking for deserters.
The driver of the bus stopped at the checkpoint, opened the door, and a Vietnamese police officer stepped onto the bus. And he looked up and down the aisle, and I thought, this is it. We're all going to be taken off this bus and shot. But in a split second, a woman sitting in the front seat, a Vietnamese woman, leaped up toward the policeman and poked her hands into his stomach. I thought she knifed him. And then I saw a bag of something move from her hands to his hands, and I thought, aha, it's a bribe.
Bag of money.
Bag of money, yes.
The bribe worked. He waved them through. The last group of men at the villa were afraid to risk another bus, but Jon was out of ideas. Finally, one of the men thought up an ingenious plan. They pretended they were delivering bundles of money to the airport in the bank van. They even called the police for an escort like this.
And they had rifles and everything, and they just led us right through the gates of the airport.
You just went right on the plane with these guys?
Right. They were safe.
All of them?
All of them.
One of them was Chi's husband.
Every time I ask you about Jon, you cry.
He's so kind, you know, to stay behind and took us out. He did so much for us. He saved my kids and my husband.
They flew on one of the last planes out of Saigon. After that, the only route of escape were the helicopters at the U.S. Embassy. Within a few days, Viet Cong tanks rolled into the presidential palace. The war was over. What followed were years of starvation and brutal repression. Many who tried to escape by boat drowned at sea. But thanks to Jon, the Citibank employees were flown out to either Guam or the Philippines and then all reunited at Camp Pendleton in California.
Do you think all this time you've been fired?
Yeah, I do still think that. I'm not worried about it, though. I'm still alive. They're all alive. That's important things.
Well, he wasn't fired. He was given a big bonus and hailed as a hero. At the reunion for Jon in Long Island with a group of his children, we found out they call him Papa.
Hi, Jon. Nice to see you. Yes, I do. I haven't talked to you in so long.
Citibank spent $1 million to resettle all the employees, giving them and many of the spouses jobs.
We'll never forget you two.
At the time, in Saigon, he thought of his colleagues at the bank as his Vietnamese family. 40 years later, still his family, but now as American as...
Do you think the people who came here have had good lives?
Yes, I do.
How many children do you actually have now, and grandchildren?
I just keep using the number 105, but the grandchildren, don't ask me. I can't keep up with that.
Now an extraordinary story from the Second World War, a humanitarian story that didn't come to light for decades. It concerns a young Londoner named Nicholas Winton who went to Prague and ended up saving the lives of 669 children, mostly Jews, from almost certain death. His story begins at the end of 1938 with Europe on the brink of war. In Germany, violence against Jews was escalating, and the infamous Munich Agreement paved the way for Hitler's armies to march unopposed into Czechoslovakia. In London, Nicholas Winton had been following events and knew that refugees fleeing the Nazis were in dire straits. He went to Czechoslovakia to see if there was anything he could do to help. What's strange is that for almost 50 years, he hardly told anyone about what he had accomplished. And for 50 years, the children knew nothing about who had saved them or how. We begin on October 1st, 1938. Nazi troops marched into the Sudetenland, the German-speaking region of Czechoslovakia. Prague, the Czech capital, was flooded with desperate people trying to escape. A fortunate few were able to send their children abroad. These parents, mostly Czech Jews, sensed war was coming and wanted to get their children out. By chance, a cameraman filmed a man holding a boy, a 29-year-old Londoner. His name, Nicholas Winton.
All I knew was that the people that I met couldn't get out, and they were looking of ways of at least getting their children out.
Nicholas Winton is one of the few people who can bear witness to those days because he's 104 years old. He told us he went to Prague to see if he might be able to save some people.
But what made you think you could do it?
I work on the motto that if something's not impossible, there must be a way of doing it.
Back in London, Winton was a successful stockbroker living the good life with a passion for sports. But he was deeply concerned about news reports from Czechoslovakia of German persecution.
I went out into the camps where the people who had been displaced were put. And it was winter and it was cold.
Emigration wasn't an option. The world's doors were closed to the refugees. Conditions in the camps were brutal for the 150,000 people trapped there, especially for the children, and no one focused on them until Nicholas Winton. But what did he do? We went to Jerusalem to Yad Vashem, Israel's memorial to the victims of the Holocaust, and asked Dr. David Silberklang, a senior historian there.
And Winton went, set up shop in a hotel in the center of the old city in Prague, and began looking into how can I organize getting some of these refugees, particularly the children, out of here.
What kind of experience did he have to qualify him for this immense bureaucratic task?
None.
Winton set up a small organization with one aim, to get as many kids out as fast as possible.
People started coming to him in increasing numbers. He didn't have time in the day to meet them all. He'd work till 2 in the morning, get up early in the morning to meet the next people. As more and more were coming, saying, take my child, take my child.
By the time he returned to London, he had a list of hundreds of children and set out to convince British authorities to take him seriously. He did it by taking stationery from an established refugee organization, adding children's section, and making himself chairman.
So that eventually they had to adopt me.
So in fact, you managed to do what you did through a little deception, a little smoke and mirrors.
Yes, to a certain extent, yes.
It required quite a bit of ingenuity.
No, it just required a printing press to get the notepaper printed.
The children's section operated from a tiny office in central London. Winton's mother was in charge. The staff were all volunteers. During the day, Winton worked as a stockbroker. Evenings, he wrestled with the British bureaucracy.
Did you approach any other countries to take some of the children?
The Americans. But the Americans wouldn't take any, which was a pity. We could have got a lot more out.
Winton had written President Roosevelt asking the U.S. to take in more children. A minor official at the U.S. Embassy in London wrote back the U.S. was unable to help. Britain agreed to accept the children, but only if Winton found families willing to take them in. So he circulated the children's pictures to advertise them. But even after a family chose a child, British authorities were slow in issuing travel documents. So Winton started having them forged. He also spread some money around.
Took a bit of blackmail on my part.
You were indulging in blackmail and forgery to get the children out.
I've never heard it put like that before.
But you seem to be enjoying it.
It worked, that's the main thing.
The first 20 children left Prague on March 14, 1939. The next day, German troops occupied Prague and the rest of Czechoslovakia. Hitler rode through the streets triumphant. Hugo Meisel was 10 years old.
Do you remember the Germans coming into Czechoslovakia?
Not only do I remember, I personally saw Hitler standing up in the car, and the children were expected to say Heil Hitler and so forth. I remember as if yesterday.
It wasn't long before violence against Jews, property confiscations, and forced labor that began in the Sudetenland spread throughout Czechoslovakia. But the Nazis allowed Winton's trains to leave, in keeping with their policy to cleanse Europe of Jews. Hugo Meisel's parents decided it was time to put him and his brother on one of the trains.
I remember that they told us that we were going to England, maybe 2 or 3 months. It would be a holiday for us, and that they would join us very shortly thereafter.
And you believed them?
Absolutely.
Were your parents emotional when they said goodbye to you?
No, I've asked myself that question many times, how my parents had the strength sorry. It never occurred to me that what they were saying to us was not true. In other words, that they realized that they would not be joining us within a short period of time.
Over the spring and summer of 1939, 7 trains carried over 600 children through the heart of Nazi Germany to Holland, where they took a ferry to the English coast. From there, they caught a train to London. An 8th train, carrying 250 more, was scheduled to leave Prague on September 1st. But that's the day the war began.
They were all at the station, even on the train, waiting to go. And war was declared, so the train never left. Never heard really what happened to all those children.
But there's reason to suspect that not many of them survived.
I think that's true, yes.
2 years after that last train, the Nazis began implementing the final solution, their plan to slaughter all the Jews of Europe. Czech Jews were rounded up and shipped to Theresienstadt, an old military garrison town about an hour north of Prague, their first stop on the road to annihilation. These tracks were the exit from Theresienstadt, the only exit. The tracks led east. The trains were called Polish transports. Destination, Auschwitz. Some 90,000 people took that one-way ride. Among them, almost all the children, so Nicholas wasn't able to get out in time. Their parents, and the parents of the children, already in England. After the war, you went back to Czechoslovakia. Was there one instant where you accepted the fact that your parents were dead?
For 3 years, we used to visit when trains came from Siberia, especially when the communists moved in 1948. A lot of people started coming back from Siberia. So I would go to a station hoping, and when films were being shown of people walking in concentration camps, Auschwitz and so forth. There are so many shots being taken by the Germans and so forth. Never stopped looking.
The name of every Czech Jew murdered in the Holocaust is painted on the walls of Prague's Pinkas Synagogue. Over 77,300 names, including Arnoška and Pavel Meisel, Hugo's parents. And Nicholas Winton? During the war, he volunteered for an ambulance unit for the Red Cross, then trained pilots for the Royal Air Force. He got married, raised a family, earned a comfortable living. For 50 years, he told hardly anyone what he had done.
A question which I know intrigues everyone who hears your story is, why did you keep it secret for so long?
I didn't really keep it secret, I just didn't talk about it.
All this time, you're in England, then you go back to Czechoslovakia, then you go to Israel. You still had no idea how your departure from Czechoslovakia had been organized.
Absolutely no idea.
And you learned that by seeing it on television.
That's right.
In 1988, the BBC learned about Winton's story and invited him to be part of a program. He had no idea
that the people sitting around him were people he had saved.
Can I ask, is there anyone in our audience tonight who owes their life to Nicholas Winton? If so, could you stand up, please? Mr. Winton, would you like to turn round? On behalf of all of them, thank you very much indeed.
I suppose it was the most emotional moment of my life, suddenly being confronted with all these children who weren't by any means children anymore.
No, they weren't, and for the first time, they looked at you and knew that you were the reason that they were alive.
Yeah. True.
I wore this around my neck, and this is the actual pass that we were given to come to England. And I'm another of the children that you saved.
Lady Milena Grenfell Baines describes Winton as one of the most modest people she's ever met.
Why do you think he didn't say anything for 50 years?
I think it was in his nature. He really felt that he'd done all he could, and having got those children settled, he felt, been there, done that, my job's done, I've got other things to do.
Other things. For the last 50 years, Winton's been helping mentally handicapped people and building homes for the elderly.
We've just opened our second old people's home, and it's full, and it's doing very well. And there are plenty of old people like me to go in.
But you're not there, you're at home.
Oh, I'd hate to go into one of my own homes. Don't print that.
Sir Nicholas Winton. In 2003, Winton was knighted and became Sir Nicholas Winton. In the Czech Republic, he's become a national hero. He was celebrated in a documentary called Nicky's Family, but he isn't really comfortable with all the adulation.
I'm not interested in the past. I think there's too much emphasis nowadays on the past and what has happened, and nobody is concentrating on the present and the future.
In 1939, Nicholas Winton used a 2-week vacation to go to Prague and ended up saving the lives of 669 children. In the decades since, of course, the children had children, who then had children, and so on. And the numbers multiplied.
I want to summarize it in one sentence. A guy takes a 2-week vacation.
And ends up with 15,000 children, yeah. Yes.
It's a pretty good story.
It's a great story.
They've got children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
And none of them would be here if it hadn't been for Sir Nick.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Terrible responsibility, isn't it?
Tonight, for the first time, we have the story of the rescue of Jessica Buchanan. It is the tale of a secret mission by SEAL Team 6 that few people have heard about until now. On a January night in 2012, members of SEAL Team 6 jumped from a plane into the skies of Somalia. Jessica Buchanan was being held hostage, and the SEALs were descending just in time. Buchanan was a humanitarian aid worker who had come to help children in one of the most dangerous places on earth. Hers was an ordeal that ended in a flash of violence, but had begun 93 days earlier when her car was stopped by bandits in a place she calls hell.
We stopped very abruptly, like so abruptly that I felt like everybody just fall forward. And then I start hearing all of this pounding on the windows and the windshield and all this shouting in Somali. And there's a man standing there screaming, and he has an AK-47 and he's shouting and he's pointing it at us. And then he climbs into the car next to me and he points an AK in my face. And they're hyped up like they're on speed. And all of a sudden we just take off. The driver just takes off and we just starts slamming all over the place down these camel tracks.
What did you think they were going to do?
I figured they were going to rape me and then kill me. And I just keep thinking, this can't be the end. This can't be the end of my life. I'm only 32 years old. I haven't had any children yet. I didn't get to say goodbye to Eric. I didn't get to say goodbye to my dad. Like, this can't be the end.
Jessica Buchanan was facing the end at the end of the earth. Somalia, on the farthest tip of Africa, is war-torn and lawless.
This is essentially no man's land.
Militias battle over an unforgiving land, as we saw while covering a famine there in 2011. It was the same year that Buchanan was with a Danish charity teaching children how to avoid landmines. On October 25th, her car was hijacked.
The driver is driving like just a madman. We're bouncing all over the place. My head keeps hitting the window, it keeps hitting the roof. I'm holding on to the side, the handle on the Land Cruiser, just trying to keep myself steady.
What happened next?
It gets dark and we've changed vehicles a couple of times. More people have come, they're screaming. And I hear from behind me a higher pitched voice going on in Somali, and I think, my God, they have a woman involved in this. And I turn around and I see a small child in the back of the Land Cruiser with an AK-47 draped in ammunition. And I think the irony of why I came to Africa in the first place.
Exactly the kid you were trying to save, a child soldier.
Yeah.
What was he doing?
Learning the trade.
She'd been kidnapped along with a co-worker, Paul Thisted. They drove into the night and then were ordered to march into the desert.
And they tell us to get down onto our knees. And I think, okay, this is it. Like, I'm bracing myself to be shot in the back of the head. And I think that there's mercy in the fact that maybe they're not going to rape me first, but that it's just going to be quick. And I'm waiting, and I'm waiting. And then all of a sudden somebody shouts from behind us, "Sleep." And I'm thinking, oh my God, I didn't hear that correctly, did I? He just said sleep.
She collapsed, slept through the night, and the next morning was met by the man who led the bandits.
And we ask him, are you going to kill us? Is that why we're here? He says, no, 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 no. Money. We just want money.
How much were they asking for?
They started out at $45 million.
They thought you were pretty valuable.
I guess so.
The bandits used her cell phone to call her husband, Eric Landemam. The two had married on an African beach 2 years before. But his number and the numbers of Buchanan's family had all been disconnected. It was part of the charity's emergency plan. The one number that worked was her Nairobi office with a hostage negotiator standing by. And so began months of talks. Where did they keep you? Day in, day out?
Under trees. Outside.
You were outdoors for 93 days?
Mm-hmm. Yep, and in the night, they forced us to sleep out in the open.
What were the nights like?
Long and cold. Then the rainy season hit, and it would rain all night long, and you're already freezing, so then you're sitting there wet.
What were you eating?
Tuna fish, maybe once a day. We would get a small can of tuna fish and a piece of bread.
Did you feel like you were beginning to lose your humanity at any point?
Yeah, I mean, they treated us like animals. To be so sick that, you know, you're vomiting behind bushes and you can't walk straight, and you're laying in the fetal position on the ground under a tree, and they don't care. Their duty was to keep me from dying because then I wasn't worth anything.
They were in the hands of men and boys who were chewing khat. It's a plant with the same effect as amphetamines.
They were so hyped up on speed. It was like drinking pot after pot of coffee, and then the crash would come, and then it brought a lot of belligerence and a lot of anger and a lot of temper.
You and Paul came up with nicknames for a lot of the people who were keeping you. That's one of the ways you kept yourself occupied.
We did.
The 10-year-old boy?
Crack baby, because he was cracked out all the time. He was chewing khat, and he had 2 black holes for eyes. There was nothing inside.
This is one of the camps where she was held. The bandits hit her, pointed their guns at her, and put a knife to her throat. But it was exposure that took a toll. She lost 25 pounds. After 3 weeks, the bandits made a video to prove that she was alive.
Have you seen the video?
I have.
Paul and myself, Jessica, we are safe and we are alive.
I can tell I'm starting to lose hope at that point.
But hope would have to last for 2 more months.
As the many weeks went by, did you think the American government's watching me, they know where I am, and somebody's going to get me out of here?
No.
Why?
Because I'm just an aid worker.
You didn't imagine that the President of the United States knew your name?
Never. Never in a million years.
After 3 months in the desert, Buchanan had a serious urinary tract infection. And in a final call to the hostage negotiator, she said this.
I'd become so ill that I couldn't stand up, I couldn't walk, so I was in so much pain. And I said, I think I have a kidney infection. And I started to cry, and I said, I'm afraid I'm going to die out here.
When that call was received here in Nairobi, it set off a chain of events that led all the way to the Oval Office. The FBI and the military consulted doctors who said that if Jessica had a kidney infection, she might have just 2 weeks to live. That was transmitted to the president, who was also informed that in just a few days, there would be a new moon. Perfect darkness for a SEAL team rescue.
Jessica Buchanan had chosen a star in the Somali sky to represent her mother, who had passed away a year before. She spoke to it every night, and with no moon, it was especially bright on January 25th.
What did you say that night?
Please tell God that I need some help. We need to get out of here.
You couldn't have known that that prayer would be answered that night.
I had no idea.
She was on a mat trying to sleep when she heard a faint scratching noise. One of the bandits she nicknamed Helper heard it too.
And I see this look of just sheer terror on Helper's face. And then all of a sudden, it's just this eruption of gunfire. And I think, okay, well, this is it. This really is truly the end. And I cover up with my blanket again, and I just start saying, oh God, oh God, oh God. And I just remember thinking, or maybe I'm saying out loud, like, I cannot survive this.
She thought she was being taken by a rival group, maybe Al-Shabaab, Islamic extremists who would surely kill her.
And then all of a sudden, I feel all these hands on me, roughly grabbing at me. And I try to protect myself, and I pull the blanket closer on top of me, and then I hear my name. But it's not a Somali accent, it's an American accent. And I can't compute, like I can't understand that somebody with an American accent knows my name. And they say, Jessica, we're with the American military. We're here to take you home, and you're safe. And pull the blanket down from my face, and all I see is black masks, black sky, and all I can say over and over is, "You're American. You're American. I don't understand. You're Americans." Thinking, how did you get here? And I'm still alive. And they ask me where my shoes are, and I don't know. And one of them picks me up and starts running. He runs for several minutes and puts me down on the ground. And then they identify themselves, and that they knew I was very sick. And they have medicine, and they have water, they have food, and they've come to take me home. At one point, I think they thought they heard something, or I don't know, this group of men who's risked their life for me already asks me to lie down on the ground because they're concerned that there might be someone out there, and then they make a circle around me, and then they lie down on top of me to protect me. And we lay like that until the helicopters come in.
When all of those SEALs laid down on top of you, you were the most important thing in the world to them.
It's really hard to comprehend.
They were going to take a bullet for you.
Mm-hmm. And they're so kind, and they're so gentle, and they are trying to assist me to get to the helicopter. But I think I've been out here for months. I can run to this helicopter myself, and so I just break away and I just take off running through the scrub, through the bush, and I throw myself onto that helicopter and push myself up against the wall. And I don't start breathing until we actually lift up off the ground. And they hand me an American flag that's folded.
What did you think of that?
I just started to cry. At that point in time, I have never in my life been so proud and so very happy to be an American.
The SEALs left on other helicopters. She didn't see their faces, didn't hear their names. They appeared, and they were gone. The only thing left in the camp were 9 dead bandits.
Mr. Speaker!
It all ended just hours before the State of the Union address. As the president walked in, he had a secret with Defense Secretary Leon Panetta that almost no one understood until later.
Good job tonight. Good job tonight.
After the speech, President Obama called Buchanan's father. Jessica met her husband, Eric, at a U.S. base in Italy.
I just couldn't believe he was standing there and that I was standing there. And we had a second chance. And then later we flew to Portland, Oregon, and I was reunited with my father and my brother and my sister and her husband.
What was the first thing you said to your father?
Daddy. And I'm so sorry that you had to go through this. But we made it.
So did her Danish co-worker, Paul Thisted, who was also rescued by the SEALs. He said later that his lucky break was being captured with an American. Jessica Buchanan has told her story in a new book, Impossible Odds, coming out this week. You may recall that she said that her first thought when being taken was that she was too young to die because she hadn't had children. Well, she's taken care of that too. She and her husband have a baby boy, and they've moved back to the States from East Africa.
Stories of Exodus mark a central theme in human history. War, famine, crippling poverty, all have forced people to flee one country for another. But there's a growing reason for leaving home and homeland. In more than 70 countries worldwide, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender, or LGBT citizens, live in fear for their freedom, their safety, and in some cases, their lives. Their governments not only sanction brutality against them, but often carry it out. There is no obvious or easy escape path, but for those lucky enough to hitch a ride, there is something called the Rainbow Railroad. Like the Underground Railroad, the Rainbow Railroad helps those fleeing danger get across borders to safety. And like its historical namesake, this network shrouds its operations in secrecy. But over a recent 6-month period, we got a look at how the Rainbow Railroad works. We met escapees from 3 continents, and were on hand for a series of departures and arrivals. Last June, on the first day of summer, Abanoob Elias left his old life in Egypt and arrived a refugee at Toronto's Pearson International Airport.
You made it. How are you feeling? Yeah, nice.
Rainbow Railroad staff was there to greet him, and on the ride into town, Abanoob took it all in. New country, new landmarks. First stop, a familiar face. This reunion was 9 months in the making. Abanoob and Ahmed Allah, 2 friends in their 20s, first met in Cairo on September 22, 2017. The occasion, a concert by Mashrua Leila, a Lebanese band popular throughout the Middle East, whose lead singer is openly gay. Caught up in the music and the moment, Abanoob did the unthinkable for a gay Egyptian. He raised the rainbow flag, a symbol of gay pride. Ahmed spotted this bold stranger in the crowd of 35,000 and says he was inspired.
He can do it, so I can do it too.
This was unthinkable to you before the concert.
So when I saw Abanoob, okay, I can do it.
The two waved the flag together. You said it was the best 5 minutes of your life.
Yeah, it was the best 5 minutes of my life. In a bad situation in Egypt, you can talk about anything. Now you are raising the flag. You are talking about LGBT rights. Oh my God, you can't talk about that in Egypt, in a public area?
In Egypt, just being openly gay can bring trouble. Human Rights Watch says 300 LGBT citizens have been detained under the country's debauchery laws in the last 5 years. Hours after the concert, Egyptian media denounced the flag raising, and security forces took the opportunity to crack down on Cairo's LGBT community, arresting dozens. Panicked, Ahmed posted this video to social media to get his story on the record. It's clear to me that I am wanted by the police, he said. He was arrested days later for, quote, promoting immorality. Police also questioned him about a woman named Farida. They're interrogating you, and they know about Farida.
Yeah, the first name, asked me the first name, was Farida.
Farida Abaouf, a trans woman and well-known LGBT rights worker in Cairo, got word police were asking about her and knew she had to leave Egypt. She took this video the night she escaped. She says she couldn't risk being recognized along the way, so she cut her hair and took shots of testosterone to look more masculine again. Farida told us she almost didn't make it past Cairo's airport officials, who pulled her aside for questioning.
He looked to me like he knows something, but he didn't tell me.
Do you think the guard knew something was up?
Yeah, he looked to my eyes, eye contact, big eye contact. It's like I know everything.
Farida made it to Canada, where Rainbow Railroad staff was waiting for her, having learned about her situation from their network in Egypt. They got her settled in Toronto, where she told them about Abanoob, who'd gone into hiding outside Cairo, and Ahmed, who was serving 3 months in solitary confinement.
I was crying a lot. I told them, please help my friends. Please, they are in jail. Can you please help them?
But you're connecting your friends in Egypt with Rainbow Railroad once you're here.
Yeah.
Founded in 2006 and based in Toronto, Rainbow Railroad has evacuated more than 600 LGBT individuals from 22 hostile countries. The small, unassuming operation fielded more than 1,000 requests for help last year and says that number will increase this year.
Yeah, I would need from Cairo to Toronto.
Referrals come from an international network of LGBT groups and safe houses. Then Rainbow Railroad secures visas and pays for flights to safety. All of it funded not by any government, but with private donations of cash and also airline miles. Executive Director Kamali Powell reviews each case. What do they all have in common?
The majority of people that we help
have told harrowing stories of being hunted down, of being excommunicated by their churches, their families, their communities. And so they've come to us really desperate.
This isn't cultural homophobia. This is police, courts, legislators.
We've heard stories of an individual who had a mob go to their house, burn it down, and when they flee to go see the police say that we cannot help you because you are gay.
The police sanctions the mob.
The police sanctions the mob. Sometimes the police are active perpetrators of this violence.
He's talking about an incident that took place in Jamaica, one of 70 countries worldwide where same-sex relations are a crime. In 7 of these countries, punishable by death. The United Nations says global gains in LGBT rights, including marriage equality, have been met with backlash in many parts of the world. Perhaps most brutally in the Russian Republic of Chechnya. Its leader has publicly denied the very existence of gay citizens. In April 2017, reports surfaced of authorities there rounding up, torturing, and killing queer Chechens. Usman, not his real name, survived this purge. He asked us to conceal his identity, fearing for the safety of his family back home. He recalls the day men in military uniform came for him at his work, took him to an abandoned warehouse, and tortured him with electric shocks.
They tied my hands behind my back and they beat me. They kept asking me for names and phone numbers.
Names and numbers of whom?
Gay men I knew, but I didn't give them anybody's name.
Even under torture?
Yes, I'm very proud of that.
After 2 weeks, Usman was released, and a friend helped get him to a safe house in Russia. There, he heard about a means to escape.
Rainbow Railroad.
That's how you heard it the first time. In their largest operation to date, Rainbow Railroad worked with Canada's foreign ministry to evacuate 42 Chechens, including Usman, and find them asylum in Canada. A few months later, Powell and Usman went to the U.S. State Department to plead for visas for LGBT Chechens still trying to get out. But this is a tough time to be seeking asylum in America, no longer a busy stop on the Rainbow Railroad. Spain, the Netherlands, and Canada are among the most popular destinations. The Chechen operation put Rainbow Railroad on the map. Donations more than tripled, making it possible for staff to venture to half a dozen LGBT-hostile countries and assess the need in person. We went with Kamali Powell to Jamaica, well known for its beaches, less so for its homophobia.
Let me tell you what we can do.
Rainbow Railroad gets more requests for safe passage from here than from anywhere else.
This is a gully. Unfortunately, like a sewage drain area where members of the LGBTQI community sleep.
But it smells like a sewer system. Under the streets of Kingston, Powell took us to see a potential Rainbow Railroad client named Blue. His fear of being attacked because he is gay is so intense, Blue goes underground, quite literally, for refuge overnight. You have this place to yourself?
This is my house.
This is your house. He told us he sleeps on cardboard boxes, and when the rain comes through the storm drain, he moves to higher ground.
If I was not gay, I wouldn't be here because I'd be at home. But because of my lifestyle and they found out about me, that's why I'm here, right?
Even Powell was taken aback by these conditions. Have you seen this in other countries?
Nothing quite like this. Once you're labeled LGBT, it's almost like a scarlet letter. Like you walk around and someone can attack you at any moment.
The threat of attack drives some gay Jamaicans to this remote hillside town, where our cameras were allowed into this safe house. Many of its residents will be referred to Powell, who went over the most urgent cases with house staff.
The problem is getting to the hospital, right, as well?
One resident told us he was stabbed 15 times. Another said she was doused with acid in an anti-gay attack. This is where they wait, for wounds to heal and visas to come through. Across the island, the wait is over for Elton McDuffus, whose work with the local LGBT rights group made him a target. He told us he survived a knife attack and an attempted break-in to his apartment as assailants shouted anti-gay slurs. After that, you said, I gotta get out.
I gotta leave, yeah.
He installed extra locks on the door and contacted Rainbow Railroad. He didn't tell his mother he was about to leave for good.
Like, I don't want my mommy to worry, I don't want my family to worry, so I try to keep them out of this process.
So what have you told them? I'll see you when I see you?
Yeah. Well, I told her, you're not going to see me for a long time.
You nervous?
Very.
Why?
Because I'm stepping into the unknown. The only thing I can say is I'm told that I'll be okay. I'll be in a better place, yeah.
You've called a worldwide exile of the LGBT community, the civil rights issue of our era. What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is that we spent many years in North America saying that marriage equality was the most important marker for the advancement of LGBT people. What we haven't done is talk about thousands of displaced people who are victims of state-sponsored violence only because of who they love.
This is your new town.
Yeah.
4 weeks after we watched him leave Jamaica, Elton McDuffus had found a taste of home in Toronto and told us he was no longer living in fear. Whole neighborhood with pride flags and gay bookstores. What's it like when you walk around there?
Like I said to my friend, we were walking on Church Street and there were a lot of gay couples walking and holding hands, and I said, I think we should hold hands. And
you said we should hold hands?
Yeah, and we did, and nobody cared, nobody looked, and that was beautiful.
The Egyptians, too, are making the most of their newfound freedom. Toronto's Pride Parade last summer was a highlight. Rainbow Railroad helped cover living expenses until the asylum claims were decided. Ahmed got his papers in March. Abanoob's came through last month. On this night in September, they were reminded of how far they've come. Mashrua Leila, the band whose concert sparked the LGBT crackdown in Cairo, was in Toronto to play a show and wanted to meet the Egyptian exiles. And when the music played, Abanoob and Ahmed stood together, just as they had in Cairo a year before.
When I was in the jail, I know that I will be able to hear this music again. I raised the flag again with Abanoob. It was an amazing moment for me. I can do what I want now. I'm safe.
You're safe?
Yeah, I'm safe.